Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine your tax dollars at work. We all expect them to improve American lives or, advance American interests.
Right. That's the fundamental expectation.
But what if they're not? What if they're funding things that seem, well, a little surprising, maybe even counterproductive? Things like, and these are directly from a new executive order we're looking at, things like drag shows in Ecuador, or efforts to develop AI-powered social media censorship tools, or even training doctoral candidates in critical race theory.
Yeah, those are some of the specific examples cited right up front in the document.
Now, before we go any further, it's really crucial we clarify something. Our role here today is simply to analyze what this executive order says. Okay, we're using the source material itself.
Exactly. We'll be reporting on its stated claims, its intentions, but we're not here to endorse or refute them. Just lay out what's in the text. And what's fascinating here, I think, is how this wide range of concerns, I mean, everything from scientific reproducibility issues to geopolitical impacts, how it's all kind of coalesced into this one major call for an overhaul.
A really significant overhaul of how federal money is distributed. It's a broad critique, isn't it?
It really is.
Absolutely. So this deep dive focuses on that brand new executive order. It was signed August 7th, 2025 by President Donald J. Trump, and it's titled Improving Oversight of Federal Grantmaking. Our mission today, understand why it was issued, what problems it says it's fixing, and, how it plans to change the whole federal funding landscape.
And we'll try to break down the key points into plain language.
Yeah.
Make sense of how these changes could actually impact things.
Yeah, things like scientific research, social programs, maybe even ultimately your wallet in your community.
Real.
So, why now? The order kicks off with this powerful statement, doesn't it, about ensuring every tax dollar improves American lives or advances American interests. What specific issues does it highlight that, well, in its view, aren't meeting that goal?
Well, connecting this to the bigger picture, the order lays out a whole series of concerns. It categorizes them really from what it calls questionable spending to more systemic inefficiencies.
So it's not just about what gets funded.
No, exactly. It's also about how it gets funded, how it's managed. The order basically claims that often the actual outcome doesn't line up with that stated purpose of improving American lives.
And it starts with some pretty striking examples of what it considers, misspent funds. It certainly doesn't hold back, does it?
Not at all.
The document explicitly claims federal grants funded things like drag shows in Ecuador, which it states pretty clearly isn't improving American lives in its view.
That's correct. And it also cites grants used for training doctoral candidates in critical race theory and developing transgender sexual education programs.
Right. These are presented as examples where, according to the order, federal funds are being used in ways it deems problematic or contrary to its vision of American interests. And it even gets into academia, claiming that back in 2024, more than 1/4 of New National Science Foundation, or NSF, grants went to diversity, equity, and inclusion and other far-left initiatives.
Yeah, and it gets even more specific there.
It does. It says these included programs promoting Marxism, class warfare propaganda, and other anti-American ideologies in the classroom. And it describes these as being masked as rigorous and thoughtful investigation.
That's quite a strong claim about the direction of some research.
It is a very strong claim, suggesting a diversion from what it sees as core scientific goals. And beyond those specific project types, the order raises some pretty serious safety and national interest concerns.
Like what?
Well, it alleges that an unsafe lab in Wuhan, China, likely the source of the COVID-19 pandemic, was doing gain-of-function research funded by the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. Wow. Gain-of-function research. That involves making pathogens potentially more dangerous, right? That's been hugely controversial.
Hugely controversial, yes. Lots of scientific debate around it.
Yeah.
And this is a very direct accusation right there in the order.
And it doesn't stop there. It mentions the NSF giving millions to develop AI-powered social media censorship tools. The order calls that a direct assault on free speech.
Explicitly, yes.
Plus, it brings up taxpayer-funded grants going to non-governmental organizations, NGOs, providing free services to illegal immigrants. The order claims this worsened the border crisis and compromised our safety.
And it also mentions funds going to organizations that actively worked against American interests abroad. So the view presented is that these aren't just questionable uses of money, but actively harmful.
Actively detrimental. Okay. And then it seems to shift gears a bit, right? To broader issues of efficacy and accountability, even for projects that might seem okay on the surface.
That's right. For instance, it states that a significant proportion of federally funded scientific research simply cannot be reproduced by external researchers. That points to a really fundamental problem with scientific integrity.
Yeah, that undermines trust in the results, doesn't it? Which is pretty alarming, especially when you think about research that affects public health or our basic understanding of things.
Absolutely. And the order even claims data falsification led to resignations of senior researchers at places like Harvard and Stanford. Institutions, it notes, once seen as highly prestigious.
So what's the impact when you have allegations like that floating around about reproducibility and the data integrity?
Well, I mean, allegations like data falsification, they seriously erode public confidence, not just in those specific findings, but in scientific institutions generally. If research isn't reproducible, or worse, based on fake data, then the whole foundation for evidence-based policy for medical advances, it gets pretty shaky.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And another point the order makes about universities is about overhead costs. It says a substantial portion of many federal research grants doesn't actually go to the scientists or the research itself.
Where does it go then?
To university facilities and administrative costs, essentially overhead. The order suggests this is a significant drain on funds before they even reach the intended research.
Okay, so the problems aren't just what gets funded, but the whole operational side. How the system works, how much money actually gets to the project.
Exactly, and that leads to the grant review process itself. The order calls it notoriously complex.
Favoring applicants who can afford, what, legal and technical experts?
That's the claim, which would definitely sound like a barrier for smaller organizations, maybe independent researchers or community groups trying to get funding. They might not have those resources.
Right, it wouldn't be a level playing field.
And the order also points to insufficient interagency coordination. Not enough communication between agencies, maybe, and not enough expert review.
Needing to. Duplication.
Duplication, yes, and potentially too much unfocused research of marginal social utility. That's the phrase it uses.
Okay, and the bottom line, according to the order?
The bottom line is that the best proposals do not always receive funding, meaning good ideas, maybe even breakthrough ideas, might be getting overlooked because of these process flaws.
So, wow. It's a really multifaceted problem statement. Specific projects, systemic issues, process flaws, the whole 9 yards. And it clearly states there's a strong need to strengthen oversight and coordination.
Definitely.
So given that whole list of concerns, you might be wondering, what does this order actually do? What are the practical steps agencies now have to take to fix this system?
Yeah, that's the crucial question, isn't it? How do agencies turn these broad criticisms into concrete actions? The order outlines a pretty specific framework for review and approval. It really aims to inject more scrutiny, more accountability.
At multiple levels, it sounds like.
Yes, moving from those critiques to actual steps.
Okay, so step 1. Each agency head has to designate a senior appointee. Is that right?
Correct. A specific person, a senior appointee, responsible for creating a whole new process.
A process to review what, exactly?
To review new funding opportunity announcements, FOAs they're called, and also discretionary grants. And that review has to make sure they're consistent with agency priorities and the national interest.
That sounds like a pretty foundational role for these new appointees, a broad mandate.
It is. And the order gets specific about what this new review process must include. Several mandatory elements.
Such as?
Well, for one, FOAs will now need approval from one or more of these senior appointees or someone they designate. There's also continued coordination with the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. They're always a key player in federal spending.
Right, and they're supposed to ensure proper expert review, too.
Yes, the order says, to the extent appropriate, there needs to be review by designated subject matter experts. The idea is to get the right eyes, the specialized knowledge on the right proposals.
Okay. And what about for the applicants? Anything to make their lives easier?
Actually, yes. This is pretty significant. The order mandates a review of the FOAs and the forms to ensure they include only such requirements as are necessary, and crucially, that they're written in plain language.
Plain language?
Yes. The stated goal is to minimize the need for legal or technical expertise in drafting an application.
Yeah.
This directly tackles that complexity issue we talked about.
Huh. That could really level the playing field for smaller groups or researchers without big support teams. That's potentially a huge shift for anyone who's waded through those dense government forms.
It could be. And there's also a new focus on interagency coordination, checking for duplication.
Yeah.
So if one agency puts out an announcement and another one has something really similar,
they might modify or withdraw one? To avoid redundancy.
Exactly. Trying to reduce that overlap and make sure taxpayer dollars aren't being spent twice on the same thing.
Makes sense. What about specifically for science grants?
For scientific research grants, there has to be a review by at least one subject matter expert in the field of the application. This could be someone on a review panel, a program officer, or even an outside expert, just ensuring that specialized knowledge is involved before funding decisions.
And finally, there's something called a pre-issuance review.
Yes, a pre-issuance review of discretionary awards. It involves actual discussion, in-person or virtual discussion, by the review panels or program offices with a senior appointee.
So it's not just pushing paper, it's a direct conversation before the money goes out.
Right. It really sounds like a significant move towards more centralized, more rigorous internal review, trying to make the process clearer and cut down on that overlap.
Okay, and this oversight doesn't stop once the grant is awarded, right?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
That accountability continues. Senior appointees have to conduct an annual review of these discretionary awards.
An annual review for what?
For consistency with agency priorities and substantial progress. And this review has to include some kind of accountability mechanism for the officials who were actually responsible for picking and granting the award in the first place.
So it's like a continuous feedback loop of oversight.
Exactly. The initial review isn't the only check.
Yeah.
And, as a temporary measure, until this whole new process is fully up and running,
Yes.
agencies can't even issue new funding opportunity announcements without getting prior approval from that designated senior appointee.
Okay, so we've covered the structural changes, the process changes, but let's talk about the substance. This is where it gets really interesting for the actual content of the grants, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Beyond the process, what specific types of projects or principles will be prioritized? Or maybe more critically, what's going to be explicitly avoided under this new order?
This is where you see that direct link between the order's stated purpose, those problems it identified, and the specific criteria it now sets for awarding funds. It's moving beyond just fixing the process to actually defining what counts as a valuable grant, at least in the view of this administration.
And it's very clear that these senior appointees, they have to use their independent judgment, right? They can't just ministerially ratify or routinely defer to recommendations.
That's a really crucial phrase. Independent judgment. It signals they aren't just meant to be rubber-stamping decisions made lower down. They have direct personal authority and responsibility.
A real re-centralization of power and discretion.
You could definitely see it that way. And under these principles, discretionary awards must, where it applies, demonstrably advance the president's policy priorities. That's laid out as a core requirement. Alignment with executive policy becomes a top criterion.
Okay. And then we get to the explicit prohibitions, the things that cannot be funded.
Right. The order states awards shall not be used to fund, promote, encourage, subsidize, or facilitate. A few key things.
First,
Racial preferences or other forms of racial discrimination by the recipient. That includes using race as a selection criterion for hiring or program participation.
okay. What else is prohibited?
It also specifically prohibits funding related to the denial by the grant recipient of the sex binary in humans, or the notion that sex is a chosen or mutable characteristic. That sets a very clear boundary on acceptable content for federal funding, according to this order.
Got it. And it's also clear on prohibiting funding related to illegal immigration.
Yes, that's another explicit ban.
And finally, there's a kind of catch-all, banning any other initiatives that compromise public safety or promote anti-American values. These are very direct mandates, reflecting a specific ideological framework.
Absolutely, clear lines drawn in the sand. Yeah. But beyond those exclusions, the order also sets some preference criteria, things that should be favored, all else being equal.
Like what?
Well, preference should go to institutions with lower indirect cost rates. That directly targets that earlier concern about administrative overhead. The aim is to get more grant money into the actual project work.
Okay, trying to make the funding more efficient. What else?
It also prefers giving grants to a broad range of recipients rather than to a select group of repeat players.
So trying to spread the funding around more, maybe encourage newcomers.
That seems to be the idea, yes. And for research grants, specifically, there's a preference for a mix of projects showing immediately demonstrable results and those aiming for longer-term breakthrough results.
So balancing short-term impact with like foundational science.
Kind of trying to cover both bases, yeah. And on the scientific front, there's more. Applicants are expected to commit to gold standard science policies.
What does that mean exactly? Gold standard science.
The order implies it means a really rigorous focus on verifiable, reproducible scholarship, objective methods, rather than other considerations. Awards should also have clear benchmarks for measuring success and progress.
Measurable outcomes. Makes sense.
And crucially, for science grants, the order says agencies should prioritize an institution's commitment to rigorous, reproducible scholarship over its historical reputation or perceived prestige.
Interesting. So it's not just about being a big, famous university. It's about the quality of your current work and your commitment to these scientific principles.
That's the stated goal. Funding based on current merit, not just past reputation.
Okay. But what about peer review? That's like the cornerstone of scientific funding, isn't it? Is that just gone?
No, not gone. The order clarifies that peer review methods are still permitted. They can still inform decision-making.
There's a but, isn't there?
There is. The recommendations from peer review remain advisory. They are explicitly not ministerially ratified, routinely deferred to, or otherwise treated as de facto binding by those senior appointees.
So peer review provides input, maybe impertinent input, but the final call rests firmly with the senior appointee.
That's exactly right. Peer review informs, it doesn't dictate the final decision.
Okay, so this order is really reshaping things. Not just administration, but the nature of what projects get supported using these clear policy and, well, ideological guardrails.
Definitely.
But what happens after a grant is awarded? You mentioned ongoing oversight. Does the order change anything about managing grants once they're active? Give the government more flexibility or control?
Yeah, absolutely. This next section is really crucial for understanding that ongoing relationship between the agency and the grant recipient. It emphasizes active management, not just a one-time award.
With that focus on national interest and agency priorities continuing throughout the grant's life.
Exactly. It represents a pretty significant power shift, allowing the government to keep a much tighter grip on how the funds are actually used, project by project.
So how does it do that? The director of OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, they're instructed to revise the uniform guidance. That's like the big rule book for federal grants, right?
Get that, the comprehensive rule book.
Yeah.
And the revisions have a few key aims. First, to streamline application requirements, which we touched on.
Okay, simplifying things.
But also, and this is huge, to permit termination for convenience for discretionary grants.
Termination for convenience, what does that mean?
It means an agency can terminate an award simply because it no longer advances agency priorities or the national interest, even if the recipient hasn't done anything wrong, hasn't defaulted on the terms.
Wow. So the government can just pull the plug mid-project if policy changes, or if they decide the project isn't heading in the right direction anymore?
Essentially, yes. It's a very powerful tool for an agency to have. Now, there are some specific legal exceptions mentioned, things related to international trade agreements, the CHAP-TS Act, the Big Infrastructure Act.
But generally, this significantly changes the risk for someone getting a grant, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. That funding isn't necessarily guaranteed for the full project duration anymore.
Okay. And this revision to the uniform guidance, it also aims to limit those facilities and administration costs, again, the overhead.
Correct. The OMB director is also told to appropriately limit the use of grant funds for those F&A costs. Again, directly tackling a problem identified right at the start of the order.
Trying to make sure more money goes to the actual work.
That's the goal. Potentially more funding flowing directly to the core research or project activities, less to overhead.
And this termination for convenience thing, does it apply only to new grants?
No, and this is fascinating. It applies to existing grants too. Within 30 days of the order, agencies have to report on what their current standard grant terms say about termination for convenience.
Okay, just report.
Report, and then take steps to actually revise the terms of existing discretionary grants to allow for immediate termination for convenience, or at least clarify that it's already allowed, especially if the award no longer advances agency priorities or the national interest.
So they're trying to apply this retroactively, in a sense.
It seems that way. And it must be included in all future grants and amendments as well. So it's both a retroactive push and a standard feature going forward. Gives agencies a lot more flexibility.
Okay. And one last thing, controlling how the money is actually spent day to day. The drawdowns.
Yes. Future grant agreements need to include terms that prohibit recipients from just directly drawing down general grant funds for specific projects without the affirmative authorization of the agency.
Meaning they can't just take money from the grant account whenever they want for any project part. They need specific approval.
That seems to be the implication. And they also have to provide written explanations or support with specificity for requests for each drawdown.
So moving away from maybe lump sum payments towards a more granular project-by-project pre-authorized spending system.
It looks like it. It's about maintaining that constant oversight of how the money's being spent in real time, not just approving the grant up front.
This really sounds like a significant increase in oversight and control throughout the entire life of a grant, not just getting it approved. It hammers home that accountability for every dollar.
And aims to ensure funds stay aligned with those stated priorities right from the start, all the way to the finish line.
Okay, so this deep dive, we've really explored how this one executive order aims to fundamentally reshape federal grant-making. It puts a huge spotlight on accountability, on defining national interests, and on the efficient use of taxpayer dollars. We've seen the specific problems it claims to tackle, citing things like drag shows in Ecuador, funding for AI-powered social media censorship tools, but also bigger systemic issues like scientific reproducibility and the sheer complexity of the grant process.
And we've detailed the new processes, the new principles it establishes to address all those concerns, new senior appointees, mandatory reviews, plain language requirements, explicit funding prohibitions.
Yeah, the implications seem really far-reaching by defining much more strictly what kinds of projects will and won't be funded, and by giving agencies this increased power to terminate grants that don't align.
It really sets a new direction, doesn't it? For federal investment across a huge range of fields.
Yeah.
Science, social programs, everything. It's a comprehensive attempt to realign federal spending with a very specific set of policy goals and priorities.
So, this deep dive has shown us an executive branch clearly aiming for tighter control, aiming for a much clearer, perhaps narrower definition of national interest when it comes to federal spending, which leaves us and you to consider. What's the ultimate impact?
Yeah, what's the impact of this kind of detailed oversight, these specific content restrictions on things like innovation, on independent research? And what about that delicate balance between, government priorities and the free pursuit of knowledge itself?
Something to definitely think about.